Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that at this very moment, more than 2,000 armed federal agents are occupying American territory, conducting military-style operations against American citizens, and that the government's own data shows they have already killed 2 innocent people while detaining thousands more in what can only be described as the largest domestic enforcement operation in modern American history? And what if I told you that this operation, unfolding right now in Minnesota, represents not just an immigration crackdown, but the complete breakdown of constitutional governance and the emergence of federal authoritarianism on American soil? For the past 71 days, Operation Metro Surge has transformed the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area into what residents describe as an occupied territory. Federal agents patrol neighborhoods, set up checkpoints on public roads, conduct raids on schools and businesses, and pursue citizens through residential areas with a level of aggression typically reserved for foreign battlefields. The numbers alone tell a story of unprecedented federal overreach. Over 3,000 immigration and customs enforcement officers, customs and border protection agents, and other federal personnel have descended on a metropolitan area with a population of 3.6 million people. To put this in perspective, the city of Minneapolis has 600 police officers. The federal government has deployed 5 times as many armed agents in the Twin Cities as Minneapolis has total law enforcement personnel. This morning alone, federal agents conducted arrests inside Birch Grove School for the Arts in Brooklyn Park, forcibly removing individuals from an educational facility in front of children. Additional arrests occurred within 4 blocks of the school, near Park Center High Schools and at the Brooklyn Golf Park. The images of masked federal agents operating inside schools, pursuing individuals through neighborhoods, and establishing what amounts to martial law in American communities should alarm every person who believes in constitutional governance. But the scope of Operation Metro Surge extends far beyond immigration enforcement. The Trump administration has explicitly linked the operation to investigations into the Feeding Our Future fraud cases, deploying Homeland Security investigations officers to pursue financial crimes that have nothing to do with immigration status. This expansion reveals the operation's true purpose. The federal government is using immigration law as a pretext to establish broad police powers over an entire metropolitan area, effectively nullifying local and state authority within Minnesota. The human cost of this operation has been catastrophic and continues to mount. On January 7th, federal agent Jonathan Ross shot and killed Renee Nicole Macklin Good, a 37-year-old American citizen, during what officials describe as a routine traffic stop. Video evidence shows Good in her vehicle when Ross approached, walked around the car, then positioned himself in front of the vehicle as other agents demanded she exit. When Good attempted to drive away from the confrontation, Ross fired 3 shots, killing her as her vehicle turned away from him. Federal officials immediately defended the shooting, claiming Ross acted in self-defense and that Good had run him over. However, video evidence contradicts these claims, showing that Good was attempting to flee when Ross positioned himself in the path of her vehicle and opened fire. The killing sparked immediate protests across Minneapolis, drawing thousands of residents who demanded accountability for federal violence against American citizens. Rather than de-escalating the situation, federal authorities responded to these protests with additional force. On January 24th, during one such demonstration, Customs and Border Protection agents shot and killed Alex Jeffrey Pretty, a 37-year-old intensive care unit nurse at a Veterans Affairs hospital. Pretty, also an American citizen, was using his phone to record federal agents confronting protesters when he came to the aid of a woman who had been pushed by officers. Video footage shows Pretty being sprayed with chemicals and struck multiple times before being shot. Officials immediately labeled Pretty a domestic terrorist and claimed he was brandishing a firearm, accusations that video evidence does not support. The killing of 2 American citizens by federal agents within 17 days created a crisis that extends far beyond Minnesota's borders. These deaths represent the first time since the Civil War that federal agents have systematically killed American citizens on American soil during domestic enforcement operations. The precedent established by Operation Metro Surge fundamentally alters the relationship between federal authority and local communities, demonstrating that the federal government now claims the right to deploy lethal force against citizens who resist or even observe federal operations. The economic warfare being conducted against Minnesota communities is equally devastating. Customer-facing businesses throughout the Twin Cities report revenue decreases of 50 to 80% as residents avoid public spaces out of fear of federal detention. Restaurants, shops, hotels, and service businesses that serve immigrant communities have seen their customer base effectively disappear overnight. The Minneapolis City Council has allocated $1 million in emergency rental assistance for residents who have lost income due to the federal operation, recognizing that the economic disruption threatens to make thousands of families homeless. Governor Tim Walz has scheduled a press conference specifically to address the impact on small businesses, noting that many immigrant-owned establishments have been forced to close entirely. The Malcolm Yards Food Hall and World Street Kitchen, local institutions that employ hundreds of workers, report that their operations have been severely disrupted by the climate of fear created by federal agents. This economic disruption is not collateral damage from immigration enforcement. It is a deliberate strategy to pressure entire communities into compliance with federal authority through economic coercion. The constitutional crisis created by Operation Metro Surge runs deeper than violations of individual rights. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, along with the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, has filed federal lawsuits alleging that the operation violates the 10th Amendment by commandeering state and local resources for federal purposes. The lawsuit documents how federal agents have forced local police departments to respond to incidents created by federal operations, effectively requiring state and local law enforcement to support federal actions that violate state law and local policy. Between January 8th and January 11th alone, Minneapolis police officers worked more than 3,000 hours of overtime responding to public safety incidents caused by federal operations, costing taxpayers over $2 million. This forced diversion of local resources demonstrates how federal operations are not just conducting immigration enforcement, but actively disrupting the ability of state and local governments to provide basic services to their residents. Now, the legal challenge argues that federal agents have essentially commandeered police resources throughout Minnesota, forcing state and local authorities to clean up the chaos created by federal operations. More fundamentally, the lawsuit alleges that federal agents are conducting warrantless searches, making arrests without probable cause, and using excessive force in violation of Fourth Amendment protections. The deployment of federal agents to conduct immigration enforcement within schools violates long-standing policies that recognize educational institutions as protected spaces. Federal operations at Hennepin County Government Center, where agents detained individuals immediately after court hearings, represent direct federal interference with state judicial proceedings. The scope of violations documented in the lawsuit reveals a systematic federal assault on constitutional governance, rather than targeted enforcement of immigration law. The political calculations behind Operation Metro Surge are transparent and deeply troubling. The Trump administration selected Minnesota specifically because it represents a model of successful immigrant integration and multicultural governance that contradicts the administration's narrative about immigration and public safety. The state's large Somali American community, its history of refugee resettlement, and its progressive policies on immigration have made it a symbolic target for federal retaliation. Tom Homan, the administration's border czar, has explicitly described the operation as a demonstration of federal power designed to intimidate sanctuary jurisdictions across the country. The choice of Minneapolis-St. Paul as the target for the largest immigration enforcement operation in American history sends a clear message. Any community that refuses to implement federal immigration priorities will face military-style occupation by federal forces. This represents a fundamental departure from federalism and constitutional governance, establishing the principle that federal authorities can deploy overwhelming force against any jurisdiction that refuses to comply with federal mandates. The international implications of Operation Metro Surge extend far beyond domestic politics. America's allies are watching federal agents kill American citizens during domestic enforcement operations, while the administration defends these killings as necessary for public safety. The images of armed federal agents operating inside American schools and establishing checkpoints on American roads provide powerful propaganda tools for authoritarian regimes worldwide. When the United States criticizes other countries for human rights violations, those governments can now point to Operation Metro Surge as evidence of American hypocrisy. The operation has effectively ended America's credibility as a defender of constitutional governance. The resistance to Operation Metro Surge has revealed both the strength and limitations of American civil society. Local officials and citizens have mounted sustained opposition through protests, lawsuits, and mutual aid. However, the federal government's willingness to use lethal force against protesters has created a climate of fear that limits resistance activities. The killing of Alex Preddy, who was simply recording federal agents, sends a clear message that any form of observation of federal operations may be met with deadly force. This represents a fundamental change in the relationship between citizens and government. The technological aspects of Operation Metro Surge demonstrate the federal government's capacity for domestic surveillance and control. Federal agents use advanced tracking systems and coordinated communication networks to monitor individuals throughout the metropolitan area. The People Over Papers website documents dozens of incidents daily, revealing the scope of federal surveillance operations. The integration of immigration enforcement with fraud investigations allows federal agents to claim broad authority to investigate financial records and personal relationships throughout the affected area. This fusion creates a legal framework for comprehensive federal monitoring of American communities. Looking forward, Operation Metro Surge represents a test case for federal authoritarianism that will determine the future of American governance. If the federal government can deploy thousands of armed agents to occupy American communities, kill American citizens with impunity, and destroy local economies through intimidation, then constitutional limitations on federal power have effectively ceased to exist. The operation establishes precedents that future administrations can invoke to justify federal intervention in any community that refuses to comply with federal mandates. The implications extend far beyond immigration policy, to encompass federal authority over every area where federal and local policies conflict. The resistance of Minnesota officials and communities to Operation Metro Surge will determine whether constitutional federalism can survive the current assault on democratic governance. If federal forces can operate with impunity in Minneapolis, they can operate anywhere in America under similar pretexts. The choice facing Americans is simple: accept the emergence of federal authoritarianism disguised as immigration enforcement, or defend the constitutional principles that limit federal power and protect local self-governance. Friends, what we are witnessing in Minnesota is not immigration enforcement. It is the emergence of domestic authoritarianism, the breakdown of constitutional governance, and the transformation of federal agencies into occupation forces operating on American soil. The consequences of this moment will determine whether America remains a constitutional republic or becomes an authoritarian state where federal power recognizes no limits.